The journey of the young woman had already been long and tiring, her heart filled with both nervousness and anticipation as the train carried her further away from the only home she had ever known. She had answered an advertisement for a mail-order bride, believing this would be her chance at stability, at building a life where she could be cherished and needed. Clutching her modest suitcase tightly to her chest, she kept replaying in her mind how her arrival was supposed to unfold. She would step down at the correct station, her future husband would be there waiting, perhaps with a small bouquet or at least a kind smile, and together they would walk toward the unknown with some sense of certainty. Instead, fate had other plans. In the haze of smoke from the steam engine, with the conductor's hurried calls and passengers rushing in all directions, she lost track of her bearings. When the train slowed and the whistle echoed, she thought this must be her stop. Without questioning, she descended, the hem of her dress gathering dust as her boots hit the uneven platform. It only took moments for the truth to settle in. The name of the town posted at the depot was not the one she had memorized. The faces in the crowd looked neither familiar nor expectant. Men in worn hats carried satchels, women corralled restless children, and workers shouted over the roar of the departing train. She turned in every direction, waiting for someone to approach her with recognition, but no one did. Instead, she stood in the thick of strangers, her carefully rehearsed greeting caught in her throat, useless now. The heavy smoke from the engine curled into the air as the train pulled away, and with it, the chance to correct her mistake. Her heart sank with a weight that pressed harder than the suitcase in her hand. She was alone, stranded in a place that had never been meant to be part of her story. Around her, life moved quickly, yet she felt frozen. The laughter of children and the booming voices of men negotiating travel arrangements only heightened her sense of displacement. She could feel the curious stares of a few townsfolk who noticed the solitary young woman dressed finer than most, clearly not belonging to this rugged corner of the world. She swallowed her fear, reminding herself that she had endured harder days before, but the uncertainty was overwhelming. What if no one could help her? What if she had nowhere to go? Her future, once so carefully imagined, seemed to dissolve before her eyes. And yet, in that moment of despair, she did not realize that her mistake, stepping off at the wrong station, was not the end of her journey, but the very twist of fate that would lead her into a story she never could have written for herself. As the young woman tried to steady her breath and gather her thoughts in the chaos of the station, she felt the sharp sting of loneliness press harder against her chest. She clutched her suitcase and tried to decide whether to ask someone for help, but before she could take a single step, a small, desperate cry broke through the noise. A little girl, no more than 6 or 7, ran straight toward her with tears streaming down her cheeks. Without hesitation, the child wrapped her tiny arms around the woman's skirts, burying her face against the fabric as though she had found a long-lost treasure. The young woman gasped in surprise, looking down at the golden-haired child clinging to her as though she had been waiting all her life for this very moment. The girl's voice trembled but carried a conviction that silenced even the bustle around them. "Mama, God finally answered us." The woman froze, unable to move, her mind racing to make sense of what she had just heard. She had no connection to this place, no family waiting here, and yet this child had chosen her, claiming her with such fierce certainty that it shook her heart. Her first instinct was to gently push the little one away and explain the mistake, but the girl's hold tightened, and her sobs grew softer, as though relief had finally washed over her tiny frame. There was no mistaking the sincerity in her words. This was not the whim of a child lost in daydreams, but the voice of someone who had longed and prayed with every ounce of hope she had. The crowd began to notice. Men lowered their voices, and women paused in their steps, curious about the scene unfolding before them. A few exchanged glances, whispering about how unusual it was, how the child seemed certain that this stranger was meant to be hers. For the young woman, time seemed to slow. She could feel the little girl's heartbeat racing against her leg, and with it came a surge of emotions she could not contain: compassion, sorrow, and an unexplainable sense of belonging. She had come here to meet a man she did not know, ready to start a new life built on duty and necessity, but here was a child who, with one sentence, had stirred something far deeper than obligation. The young woman bent slightly, her hand hovering before she finally allowed herself to rest it on the child's back. The girl's sobs quieted instantly, as if that single touch confirmed what she had already believed in her heart. Around them, the station's noise returned, but it no longer felt the same. The woman realized she had stepped into a role she had not chosen, yet it felt strangely right. She whispered softly, not even sure what word she was saying, caught between reason and something greater than reason. At that moment, she understood that her mistake had led her exactly where she was needed most, to a child whose prayers had found their answer not in heaven's thunder, but in the quiet arrival of a lost stranger. The moment the child clung to the young woman and called her Mama, the air around them seemed to shift, as if the entire station had paused to witness something sacred. The crowd's whispers faded into the background when a tall man stepped forward, his broad shoulders casting a shadow across the dusty platform. His rugged clothes bore the signs of hard labor, and his weathered face carried both strength and weariness, the marks of a man who had carried burdens alone for far too long. He froze when he saw his daughter clinging so tightly to the stranger, her little arms wrapped as though she would never let go. For a long moment, he simply stood there, torn between disbelief and the stirring of something he had not felt in years, hope. The man's eyes met the woman's, and neither spoke at first. There was no mistaking his shock, but behind it was a silent recognition, as if life itself had orchestrated this moment. He had not been expecting anyone, certainly not a woman stepping off a train by mistake, but the sight of his daughter's tears melting into joy struck him harder than words could. She had prayed night after night for a mother, whispering to him that God would send someone. He had smiled at her faith, though in his heart he feared such a blessing might never come. Yet here was this woman, standing bewildered yet radiant, her hand resting protectively on his daughter's back as though she had been there all along. The woman herself struggled to speak, torn between explaining her mistake and the undeniable pull she felt toward both father and child. She had not meant to come here, had not meant to step into another family story, but something about their eyes, his steady, searching gaze and the child's desperate belief, anchored her to the ground. She realized that the journey she had thought was about fulfilling an agreement with a stranger might actually have been about being led to the place where her heart was truly meant to belong. As the dust settled around the departing train, the man finally stepped closer, his voice low and unsteady as he called his daughter's name. She looked up at him with a radiant smile, still clinging to the woman's skirt, and said again, "Papa, God answered us." The weight of her words left him with no argument, only a swelling in his chest that told him this was more than coincidence. What had begun as a mistake, a wrong station, a wrong stop, was slowly unfolding as Providence. The woman had come seeking a new life, but destiny had brought her to a family that needed her more than she ever could have imagined. In that instant, the future shifted for all three of them. The man no longer looked like a stranger, but like someone she could walk beside. The little girl no longer seemed like another person's child, but like the daughter she had been meant to love. It was not the path she had planned, but it was the path written for her, a chance encounter that would bind their lives together, not through obligation, but through grace, faith, and the undeniable pull of love born from the most unexpected of places.